Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Jerry Hawkins. I'm the Executive Director of Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation. Our mission is to create a radically inclusive city by addressing race and racism through narrative change, through relationship building, and through equitable policies and practices. Welcome to Transformation Tuesdays. Dallas TRHT presents Transformation Tuesdays as a community-driven online series highlighting the ways race and racism affect every aspect of our lives, and what we as a community can do to change and transform it. I'm really excited about this second panel that includes leaders in our faith community. I want to welcome to you all Akilah, Wallace, Executive Director and Leader of Faith in Texas, Mike Baughman from Union Dallas, who is also one of our Dallas TRHT Steering Committee members, and Pastor Bryan from the mighty Concord Church Dallas. And so welcome you all. Thank you all for being here with me.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
All right. So, really briefly, I just want you all to give a short intro of who you are and, you're the faith community you represent. Tell us a little bit about the mission of your faith community and what you all do. And we'll start with you, Pastor Carter.
Thanks again for having us, Jerry, and thank you for the work of your organization. My name is Bryan Carter, and been in Dallas the last close to 20 years. And so my story is I've just always had a passion for the community. I wanted to be a pastor, and then I knew pastors needed a job, so I taught school for 2 years with the hope of being a pastor, a school teacher, really just working with people, trying to transform communities. And so our church, I started pastoring our church close to 15, 16 years ago, Concord Church. And our church historically has been engaged in really not only community engagement and transformation, but at the same time around racism and racial equity and racial justice. It's in the roots of our church. And so out of that, additionally, I've been serving there. Additionally, I also co-chair Dallas Clergy, which is a group of Black and white pastors from North and Southern Dallas that are really committed to working on racial systemic issues in our community. The organization was really birthed when Ferguson was happening. Ferguson was happening, and we began to say, what happens when Ferguson comes to Dallas? How do we engage in this now? And so we've started a number of initiatives around that, and then also work with a couple other clergy networks. So my heartbeat is really trying to help build an equitable city, because I believe as a faith leader that the Bible calls us to be engaged, that we ought to be the salt of the earth, light of the world. That it's not enough to have faith, but not be engaged in addressing some of the systemic issues that are happening in our city.
Thank you, Pastor Carter. Akilah?
Good morning, and thank you. So I have the pleasure of working alongside a dynamic multiracial team to lead Faith in Texas. And we're a nonpartisan, multiracial, multi-faith grassroots movement. People who are united in values. We're working together to achieve economic, racial, and social justice for all people, and specifically those here in Texas. We are open to all people of faith and no faith. We're majority of us are Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Universalist, and just believers in humanity. We're people of diverse diverse races, faiths, socioeconomic backgrounds, and professions. And most importantly, for everyone, we're just your family, your friends, neighbors, and the community. And so we are purposely building a multiracial, directly impacted-led movement with faith and race at the center of our work. We're forging a new social identity that bridges divides and values equity, interconnectedness, and integrity over any party affiliation. And we do this by engaging people, communities, and voters through community organizing, as well as civic engagement and leadership development, ultimately to help influence and change policies at the local and state level. I am just really grateful for working with covenant partners or a variety of congregations, as well as individuals who are just representative of various communities across the region who have decided that they do not want to just be social media champions, but they actually want to like throw down and engage in really hard conversations together, ultimately, not only to just change hearts and minds of people, but to hold elected officials accountable and other decision makers who are developing, creating, and holding up systems of white supremacy that ultimately continue to oppress and suppress many of our marginalized communities.
Thank you, Akilah. Mike, Pastor Mike.
Hey, so I'm Mike Baughman. I'm a United Methodist pastor who founded Union Coffee. It's a nonprofit coffee shop that was started by the United Methodist Church. And we launched this endeavor about 8 years ago, in large part because we wanted to connect with, and we set up a coffee shop because we wanted to connect with people who don't typically connect with churches, knowing that God is at work beyond the walls of the church, and there are things that we have to learn from where God is at work beyond our own systems. And we specifically wanted to create faith communities that would be welcoming to people who were on the fringes of the church, were on the fringes of society. And we celebrated ourselves a lot, thinking we were really good at that for a bunch of years. And while we did hold, I think, some incredible sanctuary space for people who identify in the LGBTQ spectrum, we had some really hard conversations over time, realizing that we actually were really good at holding space for folks who had been marginalized but were white. And that we had created accidentally predominantly white space. And so from some really hard conversations and some wake-up calls that came as a result of that, have been trying to do work to develop less explicitly white space, to develop leaders who represent a broad spectrum of diverse. And in the midst of that, have learned and grown a lot. We're not there yet. We're seeing progress, but we know that we need to do this work on ourselves if we're going to enter authentically into the kind of work that we're called to do of eradicating racism and trying to work towards racial equity in whatever places we can.
Thank you all, and really appreciate you all being with us. So as we do at Dallas TRHT, we want to start with like setting the ground with some history. As I became more interested in history in Dallas, started to look into my own neighborhood. I live in Northwest Dallas in an area called Baughman Lake, Webb Chapel, Cochran Chapel. And I was really interested in that our places that my community live in are really denoted by areas of faith. And digging into that history a little bit, particularly the history of Webb Chapel and the history of Cochran Chapel, which were two of the established churches in Dallas County, I also realized that there are places where slave owners also participated in society there, right? Cochran Chapel near my home on Midway has a cemetery there where Obadiah Knight, who was also a slave owner, and all of these luminaries of early Dallas history also were part of the start of this white supremacist legacy that we have in Dallas County. So if you all will, I want you all to, think about this question and share some with me. What can you all share about the faith community's response to racism in the past in Dallas? And how's your faith community responding currently? And if you all have any history to share, we'll start with you, Pastor Carter, again. You're muted, Pastor Carter.
I think when you consider the church's role in racism and white supremacy, it's not a positive history. There's a great book by Jamar Tisby called The Color of Compromise. And in this book, he takes it from a national scene, but he also mentions a couple of Dallas churches, First Baptist of Dallas and others, and their role really in reinforcing white supremacy and racism. The reason there is a Black church is because the white church excluded Blacks from worship. And so there's not a positive history in terms of how they reinforce it. And sometimes, in many cases, use the scriptures. I mean, use the scriptures to justify racism. You have to ask yourself the question, how does racism exist in the church? How do we take these false narratives about the curse of Ham and others and begin to manipulate those for our own, for their own personal practices? It's a tragedy that we are in this space, and that the history of these 400 years of slavery revealed that the church was complicit, that the white church was complicit. And so the Black church becomes this movement, becomes this engine where we can work for social change. Now, the truth of the matter is that some would even say, is Christianity a white man's religion? That's not the case, because the presence of Blacks are all throughout the scriptures. Some of the early church fathers are African-American, and so there are not Blacks, I must say that. And so the influence of people of color are found in the Bible, found in the early years of the church, and continue on today. So we had it, but the white church, unfortunately, manipulated it and used it for their own economic gain, rather than really living out the truth that were taught there. And so Dallas is no different. Dallas, you see the same thread that's there through churches that continue to emphasize white supremacy and racism, and did not truly live out the scriptures in the way it should have. And so I think that's one of the reasons that we've been, the work we're doing through what's called Dallas Clergy, the last 6 or 7 years, has been important work, because it's been a work where the white church and white pastors, a white brother of mine, Jeff Warren, and others, that have really stepped up to begin to try to redeem the heritage that's there. Matter of fact, one of the recent things that happened through some of our work was a group of 10 Park cities and Highland Park pastors published a joint statement around their work around anti-racism and what justice ought to look like. So I think the church in general has a lot of work to do, but the white church especially, and that's why these voices are so important. And so I think it was important that this past summer, when we had the issues, we had a gathering of Dallas clergy with Black and white clergy, and some of those clergy are from North Dallas, using their voices. And so what we believe is that you got to use your voice. One, you got to preach about it, you got to talk about it, you got to be honest about it, you got to tell the story about Dallas, but at the same time, you got to call people to action. And we believe you can call them in at least 3 areas: education, equity, in the business and economic space, as well as in the space of criminal justice. One pastor is meeting with his church business leaders, talking about what's the strategy that can we do for our business owners. And so I think for us, it's calling them to action, because we can rectify this, but the history is troubling that the church, the white church especially, was not on the right side of history when you look at white supremacy and racism and over the generations.
Thank you, Pastor Carter. Akilah?
Yeah, and to add on to what Pastor Carter has lifted up, I also, want to recognize that, for, quite some time, we've known that the faith community has definitely shown up for the civil rights of Black people specifically that I'll speak about. However, they also, again, have contributed to holding up systems of greed and wealth extraction from Black and brown communities. I used to work for the city of Dallas in economic development department. And so I saw how there were faith leaders and, other leaders who were representatives of, the faith community who were there as part of the negotiation of land acquisition and business opportunities with local governments. But it was only for the direct benefit of a few. And ultimately it contributed to the ways that the larger communities were at a loss. And so, that's kind of the negative side, but also, not to diminish, the incredible contributions in the ways that faith people have come together here in the DFW, definitely in the past, but also in recent times, and, and seeing people of, Muslim, Jewish, and Christian faith, come together and saying, not anymore. We want to do different. We want to learn from each other. And we want to, find common ground in the ways that we truly fight for racial equity. It's also important to lift up another intersectionality in the way that the faith community has used the labor and love of women, specifically women of color, to carry the burden of directly caring for the basic needs of our communities, but also being treated unfairly, not being paid, being, credited for being wonderful vessels of community volunteerism, I should say, but not necessarily being paid for their efforts or their work or their contributions. And as well as not being effectively credited historically for the ways that they have undergirded many of these movements, campaigns, and just even the development of much of kind of these large institutions that we see across the Metroplex, and recognizing them as the leaders that they are. I also want to lift up the opportunity, from a historic standpoint, in the way that I feel that there could be a lot more bridge building work happening in the ways that we are inviting our Hispanic brothers and sisters to engage with us in this racial equity work, and having those conversations and wrestling with whiteness and, in these current times, in the ways that, some folks in Blackness and colorism has shown up in all of our spaces. So there's definitely opportunity, for us to move beyond where it was just about Black folks and Black and white people, I should say, and keeping our brown brothers and sisters on the margins, because ultimately we need to be working towards how we create equity for all of us, the intentionality of creating bilingual spaces, and then even just having conversations with those who are from Catholic churches and wrestling with their history and the ways in which they could be maybe continuing to contribute to the oppression and suppression of their people, or the silencing of their people in the ways that they may not feel comfortable showing up in this racial equity work.
Thank you, Akilah. Pastor Mike.
Yeah, so Pastor Carter brought up the curse of Ham and the way that that's been misinterpreted to encourage, whether it's racism, slavery, oppression of persons of color. And I think we so often miss in that the fact that the whole curse of Ham came because of the fragility of, someone who is in a position of power, right? That Noah curses Ham because he's passed out drunk and naked in the shed behind the house. And Ham stumbles in and sees it, right? So it's that exposure of the fact that we are not perfect that oftentimes leads, I think, the white church to lash out. And so, as we talk about these things, I think it's really important for white churches and white pastors to own our poor history in the movement. Own the fact that, and I've been really grateful, Clayton Oliphant, who's the pastor at First United Methodist Church of Richardson, has been speaking more and more about the role that white flight has played in the development of congregations like his in the northern suburbs of Dallas. And I really hope that as the Park Cities pastors are getting more involved in this work, that they might do likewise. That for white Park Cities, having been established so much on notions of white flight and white protectionism, to not own that part of their history and that part of the fact that that contributes significantly to this drain of resources that Akilah is talking about, it will be difficult for us to move forward, right? We cannot repent of a sin until we name it. And so I'm hopeful that some of the Park Cities pastors that are involved in this project will be naming that as well, and then doing the work that follows up. Right, I'm aware as a Methodist pastor that I really need to own our story. The churches that Jerry was talking about are Methodist churches. I'm thankful for Dallas TRHT for bringing about some of the history. It sent me on a rabbit trail to find out more information about Reverend James Anderson Smith, who was a Methodist pastor who came into the area and brought with him 19 slaves of African descent, established a plantation in the area that Jerry lives right now, and use the funds from that plantation in large part to sponsor the development and the construction of those churches. And he was celebrated by the early Methodist Church. At his eulogy, another Methodist pastor said that he defied the dangers of wild beasts and savage men and converted the prairies from a vast wilderness to a veritable paradise of Christian civilization. And he was lauded for his moral integrity. Right, so I mean, for our church to be rooted, for the Methodist movement to be rooted in something like that, we need to start naming that history and then start figuring out what are the acts that we need to do to build about equity as a result of that kind of history, because that set a trajectory for the city of Dallas. And that man, James Anderson Smith, was one of the first 5 county commissioners for Dallas County, where racist policies were set in stone. So we need to come to terms with that history. It's not good.
And I would even say that, you know, I mentioned the white church, but even the black church has struggled in this space. Even when you think about Dallas, when Dr. King is coming and some black churches and pastors are resisting him coming to the city. So, I mean, it's both and, you know. I think the church in general has to examine itself and say, where do I stand on racial justice matters? I mean, all of us have some issues in the past, but how do we make sure that for today, that we stand on the right side of history, that we are not giving in to white supremacy or greed or what's easy or compromise, but instead we stand on the truth of what God's word says and what he calls us to do in this time and this moment. Because it doesn't matter, the church at times, if we're not careful, we can easily get distracted to a different agenda other than what God has called us to.
No, that's really good. And I'm glad you mentioned a couple of things. One was this acknowledgement of history is also, you know, in the faith tradition, you actually got to do something about something you do, which is repent, you know what I mean? And be responsible for the things that you've done. So that's something I'm really interested in hearing about you all. But you also said examining yourselves. And I think this is a time of examination, right? We are witnessing a pandemic that we haven't seen in 100 years. Also, this reckoning with racism, particularly anti-Black racism, that the world hasn't seen in a while. And so, I want to ask you all. We'll start with Akilah this time. Why is this time different for your faith community, and what are you all planning to do because of the examination that's happening?
Yeah, and so again, you know, not here representative of a church, but more so an organization, that being Faith in Texas. And for us, what we're doing different is recognizing that, one, we're a little older now and more mature as an organization, and we've had a little bit more experiences, and really wrestling with like that the way in which we say we're going to engage with people of different race and faith is challenging. And it hasn't been this kumbaya moment. And I think oftentimes, you know, leaders have these ideas of like, oh yes, we're going to bring all these people together with different points of views and you know, say it's a safe space for everyone to show up and truly be their full selves. But then when that comes together, we have folks who are part of the dominant narrative, which traditionally are Protestant Christian folks, who take control of the ideas, even the holy text kind of context, you know, what scriptures are invited into this space, what songs are going to take place. And so it creates issues for those who may have varying religious beliefs or no belief at all. So for us at Faith in Texas, we realized that we needed to slow down and really learn like from the experts on the practices of racial healing, the intentionality of having race caucuses and safe spaces for people, for Black people to be together as one and like really wrestling with race issues, for white folks to be together and for them to wrestle with their whiteness and what does that mean for them, for our Hispanic and Latinx brothers and sisters, right? A space for them. So that's what we had to do differently and not just be so caught up in the main agenda and plans, whether it's to shape a policy, whether it's to, you know, try to get everybody to turn out the vote, and like just kind of overlook the realities that there was still trauma and still pain that the communities have experienced at the hands of the other, that we can't just bring, you know, well-meaning white folks who's like, yes, I really want to, you know, support you and what can I do, and, you know, into spaces with, you know, Black folks who have been like directly harmed by white folks and who honestly are just like, I don't want to talk to you. Like, and don't try to from the position of faith, like feel as though like, well, but we love each other, we're neighbors, but yeah, but you're also a neighbor who has created significant harm towards me and my mother and my grandmother and generations back, right? And not take that time. So that is what we're doing in the way that even as we're building out robust campaigns on very specific issue priorities around divesting from systems of white supremacy and then investing in our true liberation, that we are still trying to make sure that we have space for people to, and partner with organizations like Dallas TRHT and others, Faith Forward and Faith Commons and the like, so that we can like really have the hard conversations. And as well as the space that we intentionally have with clergy and recognizing them for like the humanity and like outside of the titles, like, you know, let's really have some hard conversations around what does it mean to speak about justice from the pulpit, and preparing them with the tools necessary to really navigate that, especially when you have governing bodies within many religious institutions that they are beholden to, and that, you know, if, you know, a pastor or, you know, minister says the wrong thing, what that can mean for them and their ability to take care of themselves and their family and maintain a respectful, you know, career as a faith leader. So that's what we're doing, as well as like the intentionality of trying to build out infrastructure to support bilingual communications. Because again, we are in Texas. We cannot continue to just make this about a black and white conversation. We have to be engaging our brown brothers and sisters who may feel as though they're on the margins and that their issues are not being heard or talked about in these spaces. They are experiencing discrimination, racism, all of the things that are impacting Black folks. It may not be, you know, we won't get into the oppression Olympics, but it truly is like we have to ensure that we are centering the voices of. We truly want to work towards the liberation of all people. So that's what we're doing differently, is trying to find a way to move fast on policies in, you know, really important matters like the upcoming election, but also saying, but how do we navigate the sensitivities of different races coming together and not ignore it? Because I'll be honest, in the past, we've had some wonderful wins around, you know, passing of ordinances and policies and fighting preemption and the 2018 state ledge, but the trauma and pain that was left behind without really doing the hard work created a variety of different flights where Black people was like, this isn't a safe space for me. That was hurtful and harmful for me as a Black woman leading this organization, but it was something I had to take seriously and recognize that we have to do something about that.
Thank you, Akilah. It's really good. Pastor Mike, how's your organization and your faith community different because of what's happening right now? What are you all planning?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it is that has opened up. I mean, I have guesses as to what it is that's opened up and led to some changes, especially among white church leaders to want to get more involved now. I mean, I think that there's some element of the pandemic that plays into that. Within the church, we have this notion of apocalyptic times, that it comes from this root word apocalypses, which means like an uncovering of that which is veiled. And so I think in times of crisis, like a national pandemic, the things that are just beneath the surface to at least a white perspective are suddenly kind of revealed and drawn out. And so maybe there's some truth to that. But I have seen a lot more white clergy now interested in getting involved and having more than just anti-racist ideas and actually wanting to involve in practices. So I've been really grateful for the leadership of Rachel Triska over at Life in Deep Ellum, who was one of the co-pastors there. And she and I have been working together on, we developed a cohort for white church leaders who want to get involved in anti-racist work but don't know how to do that work. And so we put together a 6-week cohort that's just wrapping now with about 50 white church leaders, and it's been amazing to see the kind of transformation, the willingness to get involved that's been taking place. You know, years ago, I remember Michael Waters saying that you know, it's white folks that establish white supremacy. The white folks have to play a role in dismantling it. And so I think that hopefully, and I'm embarrassed embarrassed beyond measure how long it's taken for white churches and white leaders to finally start waking up to these realities. But given the fact that there is some waking up and some willingness to own some of the real shit that's happened, and I don't use that word lightly, like it's an offensive reality, systemic white supremacy that has been propped up by the church. And so I use an offensive word to describe it. We're finally starting to own our shit, and I hope we actually do the work to clean it up.
Thank you, Pastor Mike, for being, very blunt about it. Pastor Carter, I just visited Concord in March, with a full church. And a few weeks later, I see you on the pulpit, speaking out to the multitude of seats. So I know that the pandemic has changed the way you all operate, but how's it changed what you all are thinking about and what are you all planning to do, especially with this reckoning with racism?
I think, when you think about this summer, you think about COVID and how it exposed disparities that already existed. You think about George Floyd and the trauma and the murder that he experienced. And so I think what has really happened is that to some extent, God has given us a window into the work of justice that the church has to step fully into, And so I think the awakening to white America that has said, aha. And so you see corporate America, you see even in Dallas, the Citizens Council and the Dallas Regional Chamber and City of Dallas Economic. You're hearing conversations, the work you guys have been doing with the City of Dallas. I'm very hopeful that we can redeem this moment for something very, very good. And so for us, we really have tried to focus on several key areas. One is conversations. We think we got to have conversations. And so we've been having conversations with pastors. Are you preaching about it? Are you talking about it? How are you addressing it? Because as Akilah mentioned, some pastors they're just starting to step into this space, and we're trying to help them to keep going even further. I love the work of Rachel that they're doing in that space and the work of Faith Forward. So I think a lot of things are happening. So I think conversations is one key area. Criminal justice is another key area. We're trying to support the groups that are putting together the demands on policing, as well as continue to work with reentry and other ministries. So criminal justice is one area we're focused on. Education. The equity in education is a big deal. And so there's work happening, whether it's with Big Thought or whether with DISD and others. Political engagement is another key area where we're trying to get people into elected offices because we believe it's crucial that they're in that space. Right now, we got about 16, 17 people out of our church that are in those spaces. Policy, of course, we know the upcoming election and in the business space, business and economics. Part of how this city, as you know, it's a business city. And so when the business community gets behind it and begins to advocate change, that's how things really begin to change systemically. And so we've had meetings with Dr. Anthony Johnson at City of Dallas and their economic plan that they're developing. That's like a 36-month journey that is much that you and I both know there are parts of the city that's been neglected. All right, they've been neglected, they've been overlooked. And so we really need policy changes and engagement. Supporting Black businesses and entrepreneurs has been something all of our churches have been doing, trying to raise up entrepreneurs in our space, and then working really partnerships. So whether it's Small Business Administration or Dallas Black Chamber, we've been really in that space of partnerships. And the last area is health. We've had a number of conversations with Parkland Hospital about their recent study. You saw the study that revealed this huge disparity, over a 20-year lifespan difference between those in Southern Dallas and those in North Dallas, and the plans that they're developing, as well as the plans that Methodist and UT Southwestern are working on to address these issues. So for us, we've kind of picked 6 key areas and said, hey, we've been in these areas for the last several years, but this current window says, how can we redeem this to really take it further? And it is encouraging. It's encouraging to see more clergy interested, more business people interested. I don't think any of us have gotten the number of calls that we've gotten about matter. All of us have gotten more calls, more people looking to donate to different causes. So my hope is that we don't lose the moment, that we really can't afford it. COVID, it's going to take a while for COVID to end. It's going to take a while for economic recovery. Kids are going back to school, and all of us know it's Black children and children of color that are going to suffer the most in this season. So we've got to do everything we can to leverage resources and leverage policies and leverage engagement to say, hey, listen, we can't go back, but we need to go forward.
Yeah, thank you all. I want to address this Facebook comment. Stacy, she says we need to call out churches who are disguising gentrification of our communities as investment. I think she's really speaking to an example of a Watermark Church with Pearl C. Anderson. And as you all mentioned, that's not just obviously the church, right? That is disinvestment of a community by the city. That is disinvestment of a school by Dallas ISD, which is also another separate entity. You talked about educational equity. It's also a school named after a Black woman too, which we can't be remiss to say. What is the role of church in addressing some of this harm? And I think that's kind of the next question, because gentrification is community harm. Can you all describe what kind of healing and transformation and repair that needs to happen in order to have a truly equitable faith community? If our faith community was equitable and everybody had what they needed from the faith community, what would it look like? We'll start with Pastor Carter again.
I think your organization has done this well and really has called us to it, which is really to repent. I think without the church repenting of the actions and their accountability and their ownership of their role, you don't make progress. So even in that instance, there has to be some accountability to say, listen, do you understand the narrative and the story and what's going on here? There has to be. Listen, let's figure out, do you understand what this really means? All right, is there another way? I think, in general, some people, some helping hurts. And I think there are some people that may have a good idea, but they don't understand sometimes how their helping actually ends up long-term hurting. And so I think there's two things. One, repentance, and then a whole lot of humility. I welcome white brothers and sisters coming, but I think when white brothers and sisters come, you have to come with humility. Help me to understand the story, ask a lot of questions, don't come with a lot of answers, be patient, because stuff doesn't change overnight and we can get somewhere. But I think it has to start in those places. They got to get educated. You got to learn. You need to read. I think the work of your organization and others to challenge people to learn the story that Dallas is on stolen land, to read the books, to learn the narratives. Myself, Pastor Jeff Warren, were invited by some business leaders and other pastors to travel to Montgomery, Alabama last week to visit Bryan Stevens's new museum, the National Memorial of Peace and Justice. And there it's a lynching museum that helps you to understand history, okay? And so this business leader, he took us there because it was AT&T CEO. He helped us to understand. He said, this museum has helped change my viewpoint on this whole matter of systemic racism and how it needs to be addressed. And so I think until you repent, until you learn, until you adopt the attitude of humility, then what you'll get is actions, but actions that may not be fully educated on the context and what's happening and the historical implications. So it's for me, I think it starts there. I think you said it before. Without the repenting, without acknowledging, there are no monuments in our city to the lynchings or to the historic past. And so without that, how do you build forward without acknowledging the past?
Thank you, Pastor Carter. Pastor Mike?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really important in this, and I'm so grateful for Stacey's comment and agree wholeheartedly, is that we have to attend to the way we change the world, because that's how we change the world, right? If we're not attending to the way we work towards equity, then we won't actually build equity. And so, I share with some of Akilah's concerns, and I hear in that a sense that oftentimes some of the organizations that are pushing for racial equity, especially among churches, aren't demonstrating equity in other spaces, right? An organization that is that is led largely by some of the most powerful voices that amplify the most powerful voices aren't actually pushing towards equity, right? When we have a president who dismisses the voices of a powerful Black woman like Michelle Obama as being in over her head, then it's especially important that we look for, are the movements that are pushing for racial equity also pushing for gender equity, right? Beyond just token female leadership at an event. But when I see organizations of churches that are trying to work for racial equity and yet are elevating only male voices, it makes me nervous. And I think other folks in the city of Dallas are reticent to follow an organization that says they're about equity, but isn't lifting up gender equity in their pulpits, that isn't inviting a congregation, say like Cathedral of Hope, to be involved in the work that they're doing, isn't inviting an organization like Faith in Texas or Faith Forward Dallas to be a part of it. Because the reality is that, and this might be awkward, but I feel like Dallas Clergy exhibits a lot of that inequitable practices, where we don't see women being put in the forefront, where it's primarily conservative evangelical voices, and exclusively so. And that ends up not demonstrating equity to a city as it pushes for equity. We see the—
I appreciate your concern, without a doubt. That's a fair comment. But I mean, I'm open. Listen, we don't have any exclusion. We're a church movement. We invite all churches. We have women pastors. We're not that way. So I'd be careful about just ask me. You know what I mean? I think that's part of the challenge that we sometimes have in the faith community, is that we're quick to form opinions. I got Instagram, I got Twitter, I'm available. Just ask me a question. I don't have any problems dealing with that. But I really appreciate that, Pastor, and I appreciate your work as well. Thanks.
Thank you all both. We need more of this honest conversation. Akilah?
Yeah, so well, Michael's already kind of touched on, where I wanted to start with, but I won't beat a dead horse, but more so definitely in listening to the hearts of those who have been harmed by religious policies and doctrines that can abuse, silence, punish, and eradicate the lived experiences of women, especially Black and brown women in faith spaces, as well as, for us to start working towards healing, transformation. We at the faith community needs to center the voices of those most directly impacted, and trust and follow their lead. I had to learn this just even as a organization, executive director of a nonprofit, in the ways that like ideas may come from those who have actually experienced our unjust legal systems, and the ways in which they say, this is how you're going to get my people to listen to what you're saying and show up in any capacity. And it may be a little different. It's, it's outside of the box and all this, but we have to be willing to say, okay, cool. And not only that, we're going to invest in it. We're going to trust your idea, but also we're going to invest in it and ensure that you have the resources to carry that idea out. And even if and when those ideas or, don't necessarily pan out the way that, is expected, and invest again. Trust them again. Keep giving them opportunities, because we have to center those who are on the mark, those who are directly impacted by housing. For those of us who are standing in positions of power and influence, but yet we know our bills are going to get paid. We don't have any threats of any of our utilities being cut off. We have the resources to provide tutors and manage working from home and taking care of our children and making sure that they're safe and they're good. We don't have any issues about food, because we can just get online and have our food safely delivered to us at any point, because we can pay for it, or whatever the case may be. All of the ways that positions of privilege, like that we think that we're being the best representatives for others. And then we continue to just contribute to these systems of oppression. And they see us as just like, okay, you really don't have my best interest at heart, because you didn't even listen to me, or or didn't even ask me or invite me into the space, and don't do it from a position of like, okay, now we want to hear from you. Like literally, we want you to hold this meeting. You set the agenda. You set the course. Matter of fact, you tell us who should be invited, not we create who's going to be there, and then we invite you to be the token voice. So we have to center those most directly impacted by systems of inequity. And then also, I got to say this, we got to stop creating new plans, organizations, and programs. There are plenty that already exist. And often what we see is that those who have the most power or influence listen to those who may not have that level of influence, or their pulpit may not be as big, or their audience may not be as far and wide. You'll listen to their ideas and then go create something of your own built on your platform that is representative of what you want to have, that doesn't create spaces for collaboration and partnership. And then folks wonder why people are like, I'm good, like on the faith community, like, because you're making it very clear that I will only be a part of something that I'm leading, and that it's hard to humble yourself and then follow folks who from a different class, geographic location, whatever the difference may be. We have to do better in the ways that, like, I'm hearing about, working with, folks to create new plans. How about the fact that the city of Dallas has had a comprehensive housing plan that was supposed to have been implemented years ago that they barely moved on, but yet we want to come to them and say, oh, let's start working on this new housing or economic development plan. How about you work on the one that already was invested millions of dollars in, that y'all done nothing with? So ultimately, all this to say, then there's the organize. Yes, it's important to have brilliant people, like even for me, I feel uncomfortable being in this space, like speaking on behalf of others versus me tapping someone who someone else to lead in this conversation, because we have to stop that in the way that we only position folks of a certain title or status to be the representative or to speak on behalf of everyone, versus just bring the regular folks who can say, nah, this is what it meant for me, and bring them together, organize them in large numbers where they feel that they are bought into it and that you actually care about them to influence change. Because there's a lot of back office conversations that are happening. And then also within that, there's still the moments of which, like, you're still kind of negotiating in a way that still maintains the same systems of power structures and influence. And there isn't a trickle down effect as much as we like to believe that it is. So stop creating new plans, organizations, and programs. Invest and support those that already exist, especially those that are being led by women, period, and women of color. Partner, talk, humble yourself, and just collaborate versus trying to create new things. And stop running from hard conversations, and ensure that you bring in actual trained professionals to help facilitate and guide that discussion. I think it's great that, we have many well-educated and experienced faith leaders, but when it comes to this racial equity conversation and some of the nuances, there's national and local experts like Jerry and many others that we need to bring in to facilitate and guide that conversation, because folks will run away from things that actually trigger them, or will try to shift and pivot to a way that softens it, when it's like, no, go ahead and take this hard blow. Let's talk about how you are contributing to patriarchy. Let's talk about how the way in which your particular faith tradition is keeping Black, queer, trans women and men from feeling safe to even show up in the pulpit or right now, virtually online.
No, thank you for that. All those truths. So I'm going to close out. I'm going to close out with Pastor Carter because he has to hop off shortly. But my father, the late Reverend Jerry Hawkins Sr., had me read the Bible to him every night as a kid, like every night. So when I think about my church experience, which was a very old school church experience in which we went to the church 6 out of the 7 days a week, altar call, choir rehearsal, Terry service on Friday, all of those things. Even in the summer, vacation Bible school, BTU, Bible trade, One thing my father talked to me, and this Akilah alluded to this, was the need for investment. My father said you can tell a lot about people or tell a lot about organizations on where they spend their time and their money, right? We live in a capitalist society, and so we need support for this work, right? This work is valuable, and it can really change not only hearts and minds, but change the lives of people who are, suffering through oppression and suffering through racism. So can you close us out, you all? We want to start with Pastor Carter by saying, what can we do to support anti-racism and promote racial equity, racial healing, and racial justice in Dallas's faith community?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities to really support those work. I think supporting the Dallas TRHT, I think supporting Faith in Texas, I think supporting Faith Forward, Dallas. I mean, I think there's a lot of rooms for the way I approach it is this: find the lane you want to run in and run in that lane. If it's criminal justice, then you need to be committed to criminal justice, work with Faith in Texas, work with some of our community organizers, Mothers Against Police Brutality. Find that space and run in it. If it's in health, then Parkland has a strategy they're working on, other spaces, other hospitals, UT Southwestern, Methodist, then lean into that space. If it's in political engagement, all right, then lean in that space. So whether that's voter registration or voter engagement, or you feel like you want to get engaged and serve on a board, or you want to get engaged and run for office, get in that space, get educated, get learned. The other space that we mentioned is educational equity. If you want to be engaged in that space, then let's begin to get in that space and begin to figure out how do we deal with those barriers that exist so that we can help our kids have the opportunities and the advantages that they need. So for me, the way I view it is find the lane. If it's business and you want to work in that space, work in that space. I believe that everybody has a role they can play. One of the things we try to teach our congregation is that every member is a minister. I mean, every single person. So you don't have to be the pastor. You don't have to have no degree. We've got community organizers in our church, others. I mean, you just work exactly where you are. And I think sometimes what happens is a lot of people begin to say, well, they always think it's somebody else. No, you go line up under an organization and begin to serve and volunteer and give your money and give your time and give your energy. And that's how you make a real impact. Or if you want to do it through the church, you can do it through our church. So for me, I think it's you find the area you feel called for, passionate about, you want to grow in your expertise and get engaged there. The one thing I appreciate about Dallas, there's some great organizations in Dallas. We're not the only one. We believe in partnership. And so there's some great organizations in Dallas doing great work in all of those spaces. And I just would encourage people to find one in that lane and run it and do what you can do to make sure you're doing something to build and seek out racial justice and racial equity.
Thank you, Pastor Carter. Where can we find out more about Concord and your work?
You can follow me at Mr. Bryan L. Carter on all platforms. Our churches is concorddallas.org, DallasClergy.org as well. And so we're just grateful to be in Dallas and doing the work together. I have to step off to another commitment. But again, hey, thank you guys so much. Pleasure being with you. Akilah and Pastor Baughman, thank you for your work as well.
Thank you, Pastor Carter. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Pastor Mike.
I mean, I think as far as what work there is to do, I love what Pastor Carter said in this regard, and that Akilah said about getting involved in things that already exist out there. I think one of the reasons why folks are who are outside of the church are reticent to trust the church is that oftentimes when the church wants to get involved in an issue, they try to do it on their own terms. They try to do it to gain as much credit as they can, and they make a big to-do about it. When there are folks who have been on the ground doing that work for a long, long time, and sometimes we come in and stomp all over it. So I think this encouragement to find your lane and run with, not just run in that lane that you find, but run with the folks who have already been running in that lane. Within the Christian tradition, we have this notion of the omnipresence of God, that God will not be constrained by the boundaries of the church, will not be constrained by the boundaries of religious community. And so when we start launching efforts without consulting those outside, we are limiting ourselves. We're limiting connecting with the ways that God is already at work outside of the church. and the lessons that God has planted outside of the church for us to learn. So I think a critical part of our work is to labor continually to see how God is at work outside of the church. Be a part of that work, bring our full resources to the table with humility, and then find out how it is that we can support it and be a part of it. Yeah, and then maybe if folks start asking us our opinion on things, then maybe we should start offering them.
Thank you, Pastor Mike. Where can we find more about your work? And where tell us where Union Coffee is.
Absolutely. Come on out for a cup. We operate on the corner of Oaklawn and Cedar Springs over in the Oaklawn neighborhood. And we have not opened up our interior space since COVID outbreak out of concern for others. And so we have a walk-up window where you can still get some coffee and connect in there. But if you check our social media, Union Dallas on pretty much anything, Facebook, Instagram, etc., you can find about a lot of the programming, the opportunities that we have to get engaged on a regular basis. And, you know, part of our hope is to eventually be able to have a more steady presence in the southern sector of Dallas, be a part of development there. And it's been a project that we've been working on for years because we didn't want to just jump in and claim any sort of space. We knew we had to work as an organization first. We haven't opened any doors yet. So we're always looking for people who are willing to help guide us and teach us how a coffee shop that's focused on leadership development of our neighborhood might be able to be a part of positive work that's already at play in the southern sector of Dallas. So if there's anyone out there who wants to help us with it, let us know. We're ready to support whatever we can.
Awesome. Thank you, Pastor Mike. Appreciate you. Akilah, please close us out. Let us know what do we need to do to, you know, invest in our communities, particularly with what you all have going on. I was blessed to participate in the pilgrimage for Black Lives that Faith in Texas did. It was a powerful, very historic and sacred sites where Black lives have been taken and forsaken. And so tell us what you all have going on in the future and what can we do?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I invite everyone listening and, you know, please share out to join Faith in Texas next Sunday, August 30th. We'll be having our Road to Liberation campaign launch. So the pilgrimage in June was kind of a moment, to be in solidarity with, the Black Lives Matters and the momentum that was taking place this summer, and really elevating and lifting up the conversation around the ways that Black people have been oppressed and suppressed in this nation. We're continuing to build on that through our Road to Liberation campaign, where we're going to really dig deeper in talking about divestment from white supremacy and investment in the true liberation at both the city and county levels. So I invite folks to go to Faith in Texas, faithintx.org. Under events, you'll see on August 30th, the Road to Liberation campaign event link, as well as I can include the link in the chat to go directly to that page. We'll have a series of breakout sessions, arts, entertainment, and influencers, really just speaking about, like, what does that mean? So we know that there's a lot of conversation around the budget for the city of Dallas and divesting from police and reallocating those funds to meet the direct needs of the community. With Faith in Texas, we're in partnership with many of those organizing on the city level, but we have been at the county level for a few years. And specifically really wanting to hold our county level officials, specifically the sheriff, judges, and the courts, responsible for the ways that they are contributing to mass incarceration here in Dallas County. And so we will be engaging the community in conversations throughout the day and facilitated, by various breakout session facilitators around what does this mean for you? How does this directly impact you? As well as hearing from those who have actually gone through our jail systems that help folks to understand, like, really what is happening, and also to invite people of faith to really be thinking about, like, what does it mean when we say that, there's not necessarily evidence or that you have been convicted of anything, that because there's a claim that you have done something wrong, that you should be locked up in cages, that you should be stripped of your humanity, that you shouldn't have safe conditions in the middle of a pandemic, that you should be susceptible to COVID-19 and mass spread, that it's okay for you to not have hygiene products. And then even when you're welcomed home, that you're returning to a society that continues to keep you oppressed. There aren't jobs available to you because you have to check off a certain box. There isn't housing opportunities because people are discriminating against you because of your past. When we say people of faith, like, yeah, I'm a Christian woman, and we say that, like, okay, I've committed a sin and I've asked for forgiveness, then forgive me and allow me to live my life. Allow me to go and be able to take care of myself and my family, and to be able to become fully engaged back into society. So we'll be really wrestling with that during this launch, as well as ultimately the goal is, like, not the goal. We are part of a movement. This isn't just like what's a one-off event. We are truly building an inclusive movement that is in partnership with many other organizations to ultimately shape policies, dismantle systems that keep everyone from having safe, affordable housing options and good paying jobs. So I invite everyone to join us next Sunday. It's virtual, we'll be online, but also we'll have a very clear action where we'll be breaking the chains. We'll be inviting everyone to create paper chains. We include the link on how to make paper chains. Y'all remember when you was kids, we used to take the paper, fold it together and link it up, right? And put it. So we'll be doing that. People will be doing that from their homes. And then we'll call everyone down to the courthouse and jail, where we'll leave a powerful message that says we will no longer tolerate business as usual. We are breaking the chains. We will no longer allow you to keep people in cages, for you to keep them locked up, to take them away from their families because of their citizen status here in this nation. So please come out and then join us in this powerful movement. If you are a clergy person or you're a member of any type of faith institution, reach out to us and say, hey, we want to throw down with you, and we can invite your congregation and help you to get trained up and educated on how to then mobilize your membership. Because that is a key piece that is missing from some of these other groups, is that it's still very top heavy, and it's still just about the influencers and the conversations that they're having in back offices, when the regular folks are not included in their voices. So we are centering organizing the people. So if you want to get your people, your flock, your members, and the communities that surround that particular building involved, then you holler at Faith in Texas.
Awesome. That's our word right there. You all have been given your call to action. So look up Faith in Texas. We are about partnership and collaboration. So we're all going to support Faith in Texas in this path of liberation. I want to thank Pastor Carter, Pastor Mike, and Akilah for joining us today. This has been another Transformation Tuesday. Dallas Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation. I really appreciate your time and your consideration. I want to thank our staff members, Erica Flood-Moultrie and Stephanie Drinker. Really appreciate my team, and we will see you again. Thank you again for joining us. Talk to you all soon.